And joining us live now, ocean survival expert Mike Tipton. Mike, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. So what were the chances that he and his dog could survive that long at sea?
Well, they range from very small to fairly large, depending on what you do, really. I mean, it's a combination of luck and skill, and it seems that Tim had both of those, in that he was very dependent on the weather for his fresh water supply, which would have been his greatest threat to survival. But he obviously knew what to do to stay out of the heat, to stay covered, to decrease sweating, so decrease his fluid requirements. So, there's a fairly big range depending on your luck and your skill.
How would marine traffic have been in that area? I mean, is there not much there, or is there a lot and he was just unlucky?
Oh, I think that probably finding a small vessel in the Pacific, and particularly by accident, because I understand it was a helicopter associated with fishing, is fairly remarkable. It's needle in a haystack, area. I mean, he was lucky to some extent that it was in the Pacific, and that's warm and reasonably calm. And so the challenge to his survival from temperature is taken out of the equation. So his number one problem is fluid. You need at least 110 mil of fluid a day. And if you don't get it, you've got a survival time of about 6 or 7 days.
Right. So I was just going to ask you that. I mean, he had the raw fish and the rainwater there, which was obviously enough. And what would that have done to his body, by the way?
Well, people tend to end up looking fairly similar when you rescue them from these situations. They're thin and hairy because they never get enough food, and they're not going to be wasting time shaving. So the most important thing is that he managed to get fresh water. I mean, you could have something like a solar still or a reverse osmosis pump on the boat that would have meant he could have made fresh water from salt water, but he didn't have that. And the other big temptation he has to avoid is drinking salt water, because we know that accelerates your death. So it's really difficult when you're dehydrated, incredibly thirsty, not to drink seawater.
And how important is it to not exert too much energy to be able to save as much as you can?
Critical for two reasons. Firstly, obviously you increase your food requirement, although even on a starvation situation, you're probably not going to die from starvation if you've got fluid in less than 40 to 60 days. But the other thing about exerting yourselves, particularly in a warm environment, is humans can sweat up to 2 liters per hour, and that's going to really accelerate your dehydration and increase your fluid requirements. So staying still, staying protected from the heat, Tim did all the right things, and then was pretty lucky with the rain and being found.
What would that canopy have looked? I mean, just going off these pictures that we're seeing there, the canopy that essentially protected him from the elements, that can't have been too big, just enough for him to sit under.
Yeah, I think the major thing it kept him from being exposed to direct sunlight and then suffering from sunburn, which is another problem that can result and accelerate your dehydration. So, staying as still as possible, minimizing his activity, protecting himself from direct sunlight, and staying warm overnight, or anything that decreases your food requirements and your fluid requirements are going to increase your chances of survival. So he did the right things.
And getting back to a normal diet, that'll take some time, no doubt.
Yes, it will. His gut is essentially shut down. He's not had very much food but raw fish going into it for 2 or 3 months. And so he just needs to be slowly weaned back onto a normal diet, which, is reasonably easy to do, but it's small meals frequently until you can get back to your normal 3 meals a day, really.
Yeah. It's a heck of a story, though, isn't it, Mike?
Yeah, it is. These things are remarkable when you see and hear about them. I mean, it's hard to put yourself in that situation where you never know if you're going to be found. So you may well, people are thinking they're going to be in that situation forever, or they might run out of fluid. And that's a real psychological challenge. So to stay positive and keep going, I'm sure Bella helped with his
Well, that's the other thing,
psychology.
how he kept the dog alive.
Yeah, that's right. And luckily, he didn't get to the choice which some explorers have got to, where it was him or the dog.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a grim visual too. And you just mentioned this at the top of our interview, Mike. How much time have you got without food and water to survive?
So, in a maritime environment with no fluid, you've probably got between 6 and 7 days. With no food at all, you've probably got 40 days. So, once you get the temperature thing sorted out, so you don't die from hypothermia, your next major challenge in terms of the hierarchy of survival is your fluid. And so, making sure you've got containers or ways of generating fresh water is absolutely critical. Otherwise, you've got about 6 days. And
Okay.
in Tim's case, he was dependent on the weather, and so it must have been a fairly stressful scenario.
Yeah, and to keep your emotions in check, part of the challenge too. I look forward to hearing the interviews that will inevitably come out of this. Mike Tipton, appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.